I think it's particularly interesting to think about children who have congenital lack of hearing, and also people later in life losing their hearing, and in both cases how that affects their cognitive health. So I had no appreciation of that, and so I became educated in that and was really compelled. Particularly, I, at least for me, found it very personally enticing, trying to understand the trajectory of a child born either deaf or with significant hearing challenges, and how that affects. So it immediately affects their ability to acquire language early in life, and then that affects their schooling. It affects their emotional connection to their parents, to their school buddies, to baby brother, and that has implications that in some cases can extend really through the rest of your life. And I had just no idea about how important. I think many people, you sort of think about hearing as a quality of life issue, and I try to avoid using that phrase because I think it's really fundamental to cognitive health overall, development early in life, and maintenance of that later in life. So I became really compelled by, this is really interesting. It's very different. Somebody at my stage in my career, completely new opportunity. And then secondly, the team that had been assembled at Decibel is this interesting combination of people who are real specialists in the conditions and biology of the inner ear, together with some people who've developed drugs in other areas. And I was really impressed with the team, and I was really impressed with the caliber of science that the company was doing, which I believe, gives us the possibility, long way to go, to have real, approved drugs in hand, and plenty of risks and challenges along the way. But really, I think the science we do is breaking down some barriers to understanding molecular pathways in the inner ear and how we treat those. So it was sort of a perfect storm of opportunity, technology, people, and really good science. So that's how it came about, and it's been fun. We know dealing with the joys of being a public company right now that's not always fun, but it's been a really engaging and, just as I say, it's a completely new chapter for me. That is correct, and it's a real paradox, and I think it creates massive opportunity, and then it also creates some challenges along the way. And so, at a high level, the numbers from the WHO, et cetera, we think about, a few hundreds of millions of people around the world afflicted by, a greater or lesser degree of hearing loss. So, a massive, unmet need with, as I've come to learn, it was trying to articulate significant broader health implications than purely the challenge of hearing maybe your workmate talk to you, and so there's huge opportunity. Historically, it's been a field that is dominated today by devices, and I know you've thought a lot about the hearing aid world, and of course there are these much more sophisticated, devices. Cochlear implants that are ways to, pipe a signal directly into your nervous system to overcome lack of hearing, and there are no approved therapeutics, and very minimal investment. So there's been very little, and it's a relatively small field in an academic sense as well. So the academic community, and so limited molecular understanding of the pathways and cell physiology inside the inner ear, and so a lack of a community pipeline of ways to think about new therapeutics. So today there are 5 or 6 small companies, 3 or 4 public ones and a couple of private ones, who are really at the forefront of thinking about new therapies for the field. Big pharma, I would say some big pharma are now circling. Astellas has a program, but really probably the only, big pharma who are committed to the field. Historically, 1 or 2 have entered and then pulled back. But today, really not a lot of commitment, but I would say a number of people circling. So I think it's going to change. I think this mismatch of the investment that you're pointing at from the huge opportunity represented by this huge patient need, that's going to get fixed. And I think that modern molecular science is going to open up pathways for new therapeutic development, and so that landscape is going to, the commercial landscape, the business landscape is going to change. Is it going to change this year or next year, or is it going to take, I don't know, another 5 years or so? Maybe a little bit harder to predict, but in the next 2 to 5 years, I'm convinced it's going to change a lot. And so us little guys find ourselves at the vanguard of that, which is really exciting, and I think creates opportunities to really get out, to blaze a path for a little company, be very innovative and driven by some of the early opportunities, which I think gene therapy is going to be a major contributor to that in the early years. And as we'll learn a lot more about that and the challenges and opportunities there over the next 2 or 3 years. But it also creates some business challenges. It's a different environment for building a biotech company when big pharma isn't an active player. And speaking as a BD guy, it means you're constrained in terms of how you think about different routes to access capital and build a company. So happy to talk about that more if that's useful. But it's sort of there's a real paradox here. I think it's going to change, but it'll take a little while. So a little bit of biology, and as I'm saying, I'm a newbie, so you'll be gentle here. But inside our inner ear, we have the cochlea, which is the primary hearing organ, and then we have the vestibule, which essentially sits next door, which together with your visual system comes together to create a sense of balance. And the cochlea and the vestibule, they're evolutionarily related to each other, and they both rely on these cells known as hair cells that are responsible for transduction of a mechanical signal. So on one hand, it's a sound wave that's being propagated through the structures of your inner ear and eventually agitating a hair cell and creating a signal that goes to your auditory nerve. And in the vestibule, the same cell is detecting movements of your head, for example, which, as I said, is integrated with your visual system to create the sense of balance. So both of those are, sub-organs of the inner ear. The hair cells, are sort of, they're highly related. They're not identical, but they're highly related. And as we've thought about building a pipeline of therapeutics for the longer term, that understanding mechanisms of hair cells and an ability potentially to regenerate hair cells, which in both organs, those hair cells are lost over the course of your life, which is why we all, somewhere between 60 and 100, our balance and our hearing start to not be as sharp as they used to be. So that the holy grail of those fields would be if one could figure out how to regenerate those hair cells. So that's a commonality, a biological commonality between the vestibule and the cochlea that has us and others thinking about therapies for both hearing and balance. Our shorter term pipeline is driven by simple in a genetic sense, simple monogenic forms of hearing loss for reasons that I don't think are particularly well understood. There aren't such clean examples of genetics driving balance problems. There are some syndromes, particularly Usher's syndrome, where people actually have combinations of hearing problems, balance problems, and visual problems. These proteins that are functioning in multiple of our sensory organs. Anyway, so that's the relationship between the two sort of faculties, and why over our longer term pipeline we see working on both hearing and balance. OTO, that's exactly right, which is short for otoferlin. So otoferlin is a protein that's expressed in the inner hair cells, which are the ones that directly connect with the auditory nerve. It's a calcium sensor, and so it's involved in the signal transduction process from that mechanical signal from the outside world, the sound wave, to the auditory nerve and into your brain, creating the concept of sound. And children born with biallelic mutations, meaning they've inherited a a non-functional copy of otoferlin from both mom and dad, they are profoundly deaf. They essentially have an auditory neuropathy, which means they have no ability to signal from the inner ear to the brain, and they are profoundly lacking hearing. And so the goal is to deliver a gene therapy through a local delivery into the inner ear, and to put back a normal copy of the otoferlin gene with the intention to complement the mutations that a child received, and with the hope to restore or the possibility to restore a physiological form of hearing in those very young children that has the possibility, obviously to be proven, that it might represent a form of hearing that could be qualitatively and quantitatively quite closely related to people who were born with full hearing capability. Yeah, no, my colleague Orion Kiefer gave a presentation this morning about the state of that program, and yeah, I mean it's exciting. So our plan is to file an IND or a CTA, the European equivalent. We're going to do one or both of those during the course of this year, and initiate a clinical trial later this year. So we've got a way to go. We have a preclinical animal package where we're able to show that by delivery of a human otoferlin gene into a rodent genetic model of the condition, that we can restore that signaling between the inner ear and the brain. And so that's the preclinical work that gives us the sort of biological proof of principle to move into human studies, and obviously with the ambition of trying to achieve something similar in a human being, recognizing that there are various risks to be overcome, challenges to be overcome in translating that mechanism, that recuperative mechanism from preclinical animal studies into human beings. But that's the promise, and it's a small population. It's a small orphan disease, but it's the genetics is very simple monogenic condition. The children are profoundly deaf, so one is trying to restore a signal from a zero baseline. And as far as we can tell, in both the animal models and the human beings, the ear is lacking this critical signaling protein, but otherwise it seems that it has fully formed naturally, in utero, despite the absence of this protein, and therefore it has the characteristics such that we and others, that there are competitors on the program, but we and others believe that it represents a interesting biological situation in which to start gene therapy for conditions of the inner ear. It has the characteristics that we really feel represent the optimal starting point. As I say, all to be proven in human beings that we can recover that phenotype. But that's the logic behind the choice. Decibel, as part of its sort of early on in terms of laying a technology platform and a research foundation for its work, implemented some pretty cutting-edge single-cell genomics technologies, and we have an outstanding team from some of the leading global academic labs in that field. And we built a database that we think is probably the largest such database in the community of gene expression patterns and DNA modification patterns in the cells of the inner ear. And we've used that both to identify key proteins that are involved in certain pathways in the inner ear, and to build a toolbox of gene regulatory elements, promoters, that we can use to manage the expression of the transgene in our gene therapy in a very defined and spatially controlled manner. And so when we talk about precision gene therapy, what we mean by that is the ability to use a capsid the viral shell that infects a certain set of cells within the inner ear. But then at the molecular level, we're controlling the expression and therefore the function of the transgene in a very specific way and trying to constrain that to the cell type in which, nature tried to, or the gene evolved and nature, aims to control it. So we're looking to replicate that. And that all comes from our genomics platform and our understanding of function of these genes, and also then our understanding of how to control them. And I think that's, in our opinion, is the state of the art gene therapy today, and Decibel has reinvested significantly in building a capability with the goal of being a leader in the deployment of that type of strategy within the inner ear.